Hello, well today's sowing begins with peas. Now I'm going to be sowing these two different ways. These I'm sowing in lengths of gutter. So these lengths are just over 4 feet, and when I plant these out they will go across our 4-foot beds very nicely. Now I'm spacing these peas a couple of inches apart. A double row would be fine in here, but actually I've sown a triple row, which is what I normally do, and that works out reasonably well. Now I've got just a multi-purpose compost in here. It is a little bit woody and lumpy, but for the peas that shouldn't be a problem at all. So I'm sowing 3 varieties here, 2 lengths of each. I've got Prince Albert, which is, that should be the first one to crop, purple podded, so those are both old varieties, and then I've got Hurst Greenshaft. Well, I suppose that's not really modern anymore, but it's a more modern variety, and that one always does really very well for us, so I'm always happy to sow that one. Now I will be sowing peas several times through the spring. We don't have enough space here to grow a huge crop of peas, so we like to grow some, and they're a bit of a treat, but they're never going to be a mainstay here because we'd simply need pretty much all of the space we've got to grow a large quantity of peas. So I've laid these out. I'm just going to make sure that these are pushed down a fair bit into the soil, because otherwise they will rise up as they germinate, and that's not what you want. Now these lengths of gutter are just some that we had lying around, and we've used them for peas for quite some years now, but ideally they would be a little bit deeper. This is quite shallow guttering. It's okay, and it works fine for us, but if you have a choice, pick one of the deeper sections, one of the square gutters, and that will just give you a little bit more soil for the peas, because well, they do like a bit more depth of soil than we can provide in these gutters. So I'm just pushing these seeds down. Now a direct sowing of peas would be quite useless here. For a start, it's too cold right now, but the mice would have those. Well, I'm hoping they're not going to make it up here and steal these, but you never know with those fellas. Now I quite like sowing peas into the gutters because it's so quick just to slide these out into the beds later on. So having pressed these seeds a reasonable distance into the soil, I'm just going to top that off with some more. And I'll break up any larger pieces of the compost this time, because I don't want anything to stop the shoots from coming up. This I could sieve actually. I'm not going to, but I could. So now they're topped off, all they need is a drop of water. Now I've already watered the compost below, so I don't need to put too much on right now. Right, so the next one I'm going to sow is Alderman. Now I'm going to be planting these out in a different way, because Alderman is one of those really tall growing peas. So I'm going to start these in these particularly deep cell trays. Now I've never used these before, these have just arrived, but they look They look pretty good for this job. They've got a nice depth of soil, and although you can sow peas in ordinary modules, something like that, they do put on quite a bit of root, and I think they're going to appreciate this extra depth of soil. So to start with, I'm just going to fill that loosely. Right, so having just filled that loosely, I can now press that down a fair bit, and that should give me the right sort of depth for sowing the peas. Right, I'll give that a good watering. So I'm going to just drop about 3 peas in each cell. I'll just push those down just a little bit more. And then I'll top off with a little more compost. And probably just a little drop of water again. Right, so they are done. I will undoubtedly pop them into an unheated propagator, not because they need the protection, it would be fine in here just in the greenhouse, but if I just leave those on the top, then almost certainly some mice are going to come and eat all of those seeds, and that's not what I want. Right, so now I'm going to sow some lettuce and some rocket. I'm just going to firm this compost in just a little bit. And then give that a watering. So I'm going to be sowing 3 different varieties of lettuce, 4 seasons, Bloody Cos and Tom Thumb. Bloody Cos is a really old variety, also known as the spotted cos. And then I will sow 4 rows, I think, of rocket. Just make a little depression in the centre of each of these. Right, so all I want is a couple of seeds in the centre of each of these cells, and I will thin those to a single seedling after they've germinated. So that was 4 seasons, and now on to the Bloody Cos. And now Wheeler's Tom Thumb. And finally the rocket. And for these I'm just sowing, I don't know, 2 or 3 seeds in each cell. I probably won't even thin these. Right, and just a light covering of soil over these. So the last thing I'm sowing here is some beetroot, and once again I'm just going to firm these down and make a little depression here. So I've got some other varieties that I will sow later in the year, but this first sowing is going to be of Boltardy. I like Boltardy because it's so reliable, especially for an early sowing. So I'm going to pop, I think, about 3 seeds in each cell. And I will plant these out as a little clump. Now, it's still quite early, so when these have germinated and are ready to be planted out, I will set these in one of the cold frames. I've got one that I don't need this year for anything else, so it's available for this first crop of beetroot. Next year it will have strawberries in, so I'll have to find somewhere else to put the early beetroot. It could go out into the beds with a little bit of protection, maybe some fleece. But the cold frame is going to be ideal for these. And then just cover these with, well, a reasonable amount of compost. Right, and that is done. My final 2 varieties are Radish Long Scarlet and a fast growing variety of Cima de rapa. Now both of those are quite happy in cool conditions, but whether we'll get reasonable germination at this time of year, I'm not sure. Now I'm going to be sowing these direct, and I'll be starting these in the cold frames. Now we've had those cold frames in position for years, ever since we put the greenhouses up, but they've never had the glazing on, so this is the first year I've got glazed cold frames, so I'm interested to see how effective they are. So this is an entirely speculative sowing, and I really don't mind if we don't get much success with these. I will be sowing more of these later in the year. I don't want too many radishes in one go anyway, so I'm just going to sow 1 row of those. But obviously it would be nice if we get a crop, but if we don't, I will just sow again in a few weeks' time when conditions are a little bit better. I apologise for the noise out here. It's turned into a really blowy afternoon. So I've just raked over the surface of the soil in here. It's quite coarse in this cold frame, to be honest, but it should be okay for sowing in. The soil in here is actually quite damp, so I won't need to water these seeds, at least not for a few days. So what I'm going to do is take out 5 drills across this cold frame. The 4 at the back will be for Cima de rapa, and the drill at the front will be for the radish. So I'm just going to scatter some cima rapa seed fairly sparsely along the base of these drills. If they germinate, they will need a little bit of room to grow. And now the same for the radish. Now I don't need too many of these, and I want to give those plenty of space to develop, so not too many seeds in here. That should be plenty. So now all I'm going to do is just rake the soil back over the drills and tamp them down, and that should be fine. Now I haven't firmed that down too much, it's just a light tamping is good to get the soil in contact with the seed. Right, so I'll just drop down the lights. So I'm going to go ahead and sow a second frame in exactly the same way. And in a few weeks' time, we should find out whether this early sowing was worth making or not. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with trying an early sowing and trying to get ahead of the season, so long as you're prepared for things to go wrong sometimes, and sometimes they will. Sometimes an early sowing won't germinate well, or sometimes if you then get a cold spell, the temperatures are fine at the moment, but if we get another cold spell, that might encourage plants to run to seed, and so those early sowings can suffer, and later sowings, when conditions are much better for growth, they can catch up and do a lot better than an early sowing. But if you've got the space and you've got the seed, nothing wrong at all with having a little gamble and seeing whether it pays off. So that's it for this video. So thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.